the Pauper Players podcast. I'm Frusile, and thank you so much for joining me. If this is your first time joining me, the philosophy of this podcast is to speak with the players who are shaping the metagame so that their voices can be heard. This week's voice is joining us from Poland, and he has won the Sunday Challenge twice in the last 6 weeks, providing, of course, you count his split of the finals. That win was attributed to the other player, but when first and second place negotiate a deal and one of them agrees to click the concede button, well, I count that as a win, he counts that as a win, and I think you should as well. But that isn't what happened this last Sunday. He won outright, and he won in the stompy mirror match, because if you can't beat them, you just gotta stomp them. Thanks for coming on the podcast this week. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself and your journey as a Pauper player?
Hi, I'm Karol Guzy, on MTGO more recognizable as PR0boszcz. I'm 21 years old. I live in Poland, and currently I enjoy last summer holidays in my life. I began my MTG adventure in 2010 when I was searching for a new hobby with my older brother. He didn't enjoy our games on kitchen table, but I wanted more, so I went to local game store in my small town, met new people, went for my first FNMs, then PTQs, and suddenly forgot about the game for a few years. I came back 2 years ago when my friend finally persuaded me to try again. I decided to join cheapest format I knew that day, just to get familiar with MTGO and new rules. In the end, Pauper surprised me in a positive way, and I decided to stay a little bit longer.
I guess my first question is, what's it like to win the challenge?
It's awesome to win a challenge. I win one challenge before, but I had to split my reward with my opponent, and now without the need to sharing the reward with my opponent, and I can clearly say that I won that challenge without any consequences.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, that was about a month ago, right? And you did that with Stompy as well.
Yes, I was playing with Versus. General's cute, if it's that pronounceable in English. And he was playing Heroic, Mono White Heroic. I thought that I have a little chance for winning that, so I just persuaded him to do a split.
Yeah, I'm always down to split the finals of tournaments if I know the other person, or if there's a time constraint. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. I'm sure, though, it does feel a lot better to get the win outright. And this time you beat Diego in the mirror match.
The good thing in Stompy is that you can easily end one league in one sitting. It's not, as I tried one Tron, to playing Tron once, and I just been playing 3 days one league, and it's too much for me. I want to play a little bit more. Darning one, when I sit and play Tron, I can play and play one league with Tron. I can easily play 3 leagues with something faster, like Stompy.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to get some volume in when you're playing an aggressive deck. You know, that is always the beauty for me. When I choose to play Slivers, that's sort of why I choose to play Slivers, is that the deck's not boring, where a lot of aggro decks are boring. And also, I can finish an entire league in an hour and a half, which, you know, the average Jeskai game takes about 40 minutes to play, it feels like. I've been on the same league since Wednesday. Not that I'm gonna complain. You know, I'm doing quite well with Jeskai. I'm 12-1 this week in the leagues with it. Did get a list published, but it takes at least a half an hour to play a match with Jeskai. Usually it takes longer.
That's true. To be honest, I didn't play even a single match with Jeskai. I'm just trying to avoid it as long as it's possible.
That's interesting. You've never played with Jeskai so long as it's been legal since Modern Horizons released? You've not played Jeskai at all?
Yes, not even a single match.
Well, why is that? Is it just a deck that you don't like how it plays? Are you offended by Ephemerate? What's the aversion
I think that since I'm playing the Pauper, I try to fight and beat the best decks in the metagame, than to follow them, and play with them. So, like it was with UB Delver in the metagame, I decided to play Red Black Monarch, and with Terminates versus Gurmag Anglers and a lot of removal. So, and had very good results with that. So I think I'm that type of guy.
I also remember you were on White-Black Pestilence in the previous metagame, which had a fantastic matchup against Blue-Black Delver. So that rings true, because every time that I played you in the previous metagame, you were on White-Black Pestilence, which was a great metagame call at that time. Just like Stompy is a good metagame call at this time.
Yes, I just love Pestilence and how this card can provide card advantage and board control. It's one of the...
Yeah, it's definitely one of the most powerful commons from a power level standpoint.
That's true, and well, the combo with Guardian of the Guild Pact is one of my favorites in the whole format, and I just enjoyed that, and even more if I could beat the strongest decks in the meta.
So the Mardu Monarch deck that I've seen you get published, that plays Pestilence, doesn't it?
Yes, of course, and also the Guardian of the Guild Pact.
Right, so that deck beats everything but Tron, right?
Yes, and it have like 50-50 matchup with Jeskai. So
I mean, that's pretty solid considering how dominant Jeskai has been in the challenges. Having 50% against it seems pretty reasonable, especially if you know how to play the matchup and your opponent is unfamiliar with playing against more of a rogue strategy like Mardu Monarch.
Yes, that's definitely the point, because people really didn't know how to play versus Mardu Monarch, because I think that they were counterspelling the wrong cards and letting me resolve my combo Guild Pact and Pestilence, and that was absolutely the game and game changing. It was just so important that they shouldn't let me cast them and resolve, of course.
Yeah, that was definitely a pretty sweet list. It definitely caught my attention as something that I felt like I might want to try out, but frankly, I have not had the time in the last month or so to play a lot of Pauper. This last week, I finally had some time to play leagues again, so I'm not sure that I will have the opportunity to play that still, because there's so many sweet lists, right? You can't play them all unless you are, say, a student enjoying holiday, or perhaps you play full time like one of my previous guests. Myself, I have a whole list of decks I would love to play, and unfortunately, when every Jeskai game takes 40-45 minutes. Once I start a league with Jeskai, that's a lot of times my one league for the week.
Yes, that's understandable. Well, Mardu is very good versus Jeskai, I think, and the addition of red color just made the sideboard a little bit better, and we can play red elemental blasts or pyroblast now to counter their Muldrifters and counter spells, and it's very helpful also versus Tron.
The Mardu Monarch seems like a pretty sweet one, and I would absolutely love to try it out. It's on the list of decks I would love to tinker with right after some of the sweet lists that got published this week. Notably Raptor's deck that goes infinite using Pestermite. That one I'm going to, I think, prioritize in terms of playing. I think that going infinite in Pauper is so difficult to do that it's kind of hard to pass up. Are there any sweet lists you've seen that you would like to play recently?
Currently I'm working on the Giant Midrange Monarch deck, and I already didn't pump it as much as I will want, and I did a kind of achievement or challenge to myself to score a 5 wins in a league with my Jund list.
Apologies to Job, the guy who runs the Castle of Commons. I know he has some strong feelings about Jund being terrible in Pauper, so I would love to see you get a Jund list published. I would love to see that reaction that he will have to that. Who are you using for your Monarch? Are you using Thorn of the Black Rose, or are you using Emissary of Trust?
In my John list, I'm using Throne of the Black Rose.
Okay, I'm going to guess there's some Blightnings in there, maybe some Putrid Leeches.
No, I did tested them, but they weren't actually good enough because Putrid Leak is very vulnerable to removal on instant speed, and Lightning isn't doing much currently when your opponents are cycling astrolabes with hawks and they are drawing a lot of cards, so they can always hold 2 lands or something to discard.
Okay, but it seems like you have some nice sideboard options. You are using like some Ancient Grudges. Just tell me a little bit about this gen list. You definitely have my interest here.
My best score in league was 4-1, so it's promising. But it's definitely not the tier 1 deck. On my sideboard, I have Elemental Blasts, Gorillas, Shamans, Moments of Peace, Evinkar Justice, Duresses, Graveyard Hate, Weather the Storm, and that's actually all.
Yeah, it seems like there's some nice sideboard options in the gen colors, even if traditionally the main deck threats and to some extent answers don't hold up as well as some of the other 3 color combinations.
That's true, and I'm trying to figure out how to build it correctly, and hope so I will finally I will find the correct list and do the 5-0 result in Pauper leagues.
Well, I'm definitely rooting to see that. Are there any other sweet brews that you're working with at this time?
Currently not. I have been playing Gruul Aggro on leagues also, and I think, Mardu Pestilence was a brew on the beginning, and with your guests that were before me on your previous audition, I was talking with Modern Monkey about the Mardu challenge. I know that Hazen01, if I'm correct with his nickname, was playing Mardu also, and we were exchanging our texts and ideas about the Mardu.
Yeah, it seems like some good guys to be working with. They were absolutely fantastic guests, and I'm sure that they are fantastic brewers to have on your team as well.
No, I just wanted to say that Modern Monkey was really helpful in making my Mardu list correct.
Is that who you traditionally work with when you're coming up with some rogue strategies?
It was the single exception, and most time I'm working with my decks alone, because I wish I could join some team or group of people who work in Pauper. I'm very envy about Brazilian group of pro players in Pauper, and I also always keeping my thumbs up and cheering for them to go well.
It would probably help to speak Portuguese if you wanted to work with the Brazilians more.
I'm not very good in English, and I think my Portuguese would be just tragic.
Yeah, I think that your English is just fine, man. I think that, again, it's a lot better than my Polish, but I would guess that my Portuguese is probably just as bad as your Portuguese, which is probably why neither one of us is really working with the Brazilians to break the format. So what's more rewarding for you? The brewing process, the process of coming up and building new decks, or actually playing the game? What do you like more?
Absolutely the playing the game. I'm not a good brewer, I'm just having fun with my own brews, and I don't think they are good enough to compete on the highest level of competition, but when we talk about playing, it's making me most happy with the game.
All right, well, let's talk Stompy for a little bit. You've had some success with it. You've won the challenge twice. One with a split, one outright. In the last, 6 weeks or so, you've won the challenge twice with Stompy.
Yes, and did top 8 also sometimes.
What advice would you have for players looking to pick up the deck?
Okay, I think that there is no versatile tip for people taking up the stompy, but maybe stompy is not the easiest deck. I saw the opinion that stompy is easy to learn, hard to master. As always, people who play stompy and any other deck and in Magic have to search for their mistakes and don't blame the luck or misfortune. And because a lot of things probably you could do better, and also I could do better. I'm one, and I consider myself as a good stompy player, but I making my mistakes very often, and I see them, and I want to improve myself and correct them as much as I can.
I think that's a fantastic observation, that sometimes decks may appear to be simple on paper, but actually have some nuance to them. It looks like Stompy's no exception there. In terms of matchups, what decks don't you want to play against with Stompy?
Definitely Tron, Hellsoul version of Tron. Basically, if we don't end the game in turn 4, or maybe luckily 5th, we are going to lose it because we haven't got any direct damage and we can trample through the blockers and fog effects. Also, elves are not good matchup for us. However, I beat them in the top 8, but with a kind of a lag. And I think those two are the scariest matchup for Stompy.
Okay, how is the burn matchup these days? Because I heard some things about the burn matchup before Weather the Storm. Has Weather the Storm solved the burn matchup for you guys?
No, it didn't change anything. It's dice roll. It's still dice roll matchup. If you win it round 1, then you are in a very good position. Just you must be faster than your opponent, and if you are beginning the game on play, that's very helpful to deal the 20 damage first.
Let's talk a little bit about what decks you want to play against with Stompy. Presumably Jeskai. Presumably it has a great Jeskai matchup. What else do you want to play against in addition to that?
Definitely Mono Blue Delver. It's probably even it's almost dead in current metagame, but it was best matchup since 2 years I have been playing. I always wanted to play versus Mono Blue Delver, and actually it's it. You don't have a lot of very good matchups playing Stompy, just like you don't have a lot of bad matchups. A lot of matchups are 50-50 or maybe with some slides on one on the other sides, but I think if you know how to play them correctly, you can just have 60-70 win rate in Pauper leagues with Stompy.
Going back to the challenge, I'm curious what you played against that day.
I played with Stompy, with Hellsoul, on Dignitary Tron, obviously, Jeskai, Mono Green Ponza, Stompy, Dimir Land Destruction, Elves, Jeskai, and Stompy.
I definitely would like to hear a little bit about Dimir Land Destruction. What cards did you see in that matchup? That sounds like a fun deck.
Yes, I was shocked when I saw what my opponent is playing. When he cast Ogre of Bolas, I thought that, oh my god, UB Delver is back and what I'm going to do. But seeing him cast Fade Away and Land Destruction shocked me even more, and I remember that I do few mistakes while playing this match, but luckily I managed to win it somehow.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty sweet combo against a creature deck, blowing up some lands and then casting Fade Away. For listeners who are unfamiliar with Fade Away, it is a sorcery that costs 2 colorless and 1 blue, and so you have to pay 1 for each creature you have, or you have to sacrifice them. So blowing up some lands and then casting Fade Away is a build your own Wrath of God effect. So that seems pretty sweet. Did he have like Gurmag Anglers, or how did he win the game?
As I remember correctly, my opponent just cast Ogre of Bolas, and I attacked my opponent a few times, lowering his HP total, and he began to destroying my lands and then casting Fade Away. But I just kept sacrificing lands and some of my creatures, but I tried to keep the pressure still. Don't sacrifice either all lands or either creatures, and somehow I managed to win this match. I think I was a little bit lucky, and my opponent, I did few mistakes, and my opponent on second game or game third get flooded, so I could take advantage of that.
It seems like anyone looking to pick up Stompy at this time is going to need to be prepared to face the mirror, as it's going to be a frequent occurrence playing against it. How do you sideboard in the mirror?
It's simple. If I am on play, I keep it. I do no changes, any. And if I'm on draw, then I'm siding out Skargan and putting in Epic Confrontation. That's all.
Yeah, I guess Pit Skulks seem worse on the draw just in general. Is that something that comes out just normally on the draw?
No, it's definitely not the first cut I would cut in, even if I'm on draw. But on the mirror match, you want to just be faster and draw well. So when you are the defending player, as I like to recognize, so defending players don't want Skargan Pit Skulk because it just 1-1 very often. And instead of that, I like to put in fight effect to gain advantage and tempo and a chance to turn the match on my favor.
Okay, so anyone looking to pick up Stompy in the mirror match, you want to cut Pit Skulk on the draw, but you don't necessarily want to be cutting Pit Skulks on the draw just in general against other decks. You want to leave those in there.
Yes, that's basically true, because I think that I cut Skargan Pit Skulk on mirror and maybe on affinity versus affinity, but I'm not sure now.
Do you mulligan more aggressively in the mirror? I would imagine that Vault Scourge is one of the more important cards to have. Is that something that you're willing to go down to 5 to find?
Well, every hand with Vault Scourge and some chance to buff him, give him counters, Rancor, Elephant Guides, or whatever, is the obviously keep, because Vault Scourge is just unfair in mirror match, and being unblockable and lifelink and just playing bad boggle strategy with Vault Scourge is just what is best thing you can do to win Stompy matchup.
Now, in terms of your tournament, what would you say was your play of the day? What was the best play that you pulled off en route to your win?
My play of the day was definitely in round 4, match number 3. I was playing with my Stompy versus Monogreen Ponza. We both mulliganed to 6, and I kept hand which had 2 lands, Rancor, Hunger of the Holpag, Epic Confrontation, and absolute MVP in this matchup, Quiron Ranger. I thought that my opponent put his land destruction back when he was on play. My opponent started with Forest plus White Grove. I drew a land and played Forest plus Quiron Ranger. He played Forest plus Arbor Elf in his second turn. I drew Elephant Guide, so I already knew that I must play Bad Boggle strategy. I played Rancor on my Ranger and attacked with 1-1 open in case he would decide to block it, so I could buff it with my Hunger. On turn 4, he played Kozilek's Predator and passed the turn. I drew another Forest, played Elephant Guide and didn't attack, setting up for next turn Epic Confrontation plus Hunger. My opponent began to sacrifice his spawns, so I already knew what's going on. Turn 5, Alamak Crusher and pass. I drew another Elephant Guide, which I immediately played, and attacked with my large Quiron Ranger with Rancor and double Elephant Guide, forcing Alamak Crusher to block. I left with 2 3/3 elephants, and I cast Hunger of the Holpack on one of them. My opponent played Entrash of the Trest, and I knew it's going to be easy now. It was even more with another Holpack I just drew, so I played Epic Confrontation on Big Elephant and Entrash on the Trest, then Rancor on the big one, and decided to attack. My opponent blocked 3/3 Elephant with his Kozilek's Predator, and I cast Hunger of the Whole Pack on the smaller elephant, leaving his battlefield with Arbor Elf and H8P left, and my opponent concedes.
That's a pretty sweet play, man. I did intend to play the challenge that you won, but I was up a little too late the night before. Wound up sleeping through the first round of the challenge. There's no late registration for that, so I found myself just out of luck. I have had some time to play Pauper this week. I do have a sweet line I would like to share that occurred, 2 days after your challenge win. I had just taken out all my sideboard cards for Burn, because I haven't played against Burn in forever with Jeskai. The list that got published as a 5-0 list for me this week, that has some sideboard cards for Burn, right? There's a Weather the Storm, there's some Blue Elemental Blasts or Hydro Blasts. I took those out for more Lone Missionaries. I have a full play set now to help improve the Stompy matchup, as my only loss in my last 13 matches with Jeskai was against Stompy, and I figured Lone Missionary is pretty good against Burn as well. At any rate, I get paired against Burn right away. I get rocked the first game. So the second game, I realized that I have these Lone Missionaries, but I don't really have much else. I do have some dead cards that I don't want in there, so I shave my Maul Drifters, I shave an Archaeomancer. I have a little extra room to work with after I take out my Journey to Nowheres as well. So I sideboarded my Standard Bearers, because they're not dead cards. They're not fantastic, that's not the matchup that they are there for, but they're not dead cards. What winds up happening is I wind up locking the Burn player out of the game using Standard Bearer, because he keeps having to target it with his removal spells, rather his burn spells, which are now removal spells. And I keep ephemerating it. I ephemerate the same Standard Bearer like 3 times this game. I also, dispel to protect it, I counterspell to protect it, but it was hilarious actually using ephemerate, targeting Standard Bearer to prevent me from being the subject of burn to my face. I'm at 4 life when I'm doing this, so it's pretty timely. And it was pretty sweet. It felt like it was worth sharing. And it's the time of the week again for us to give Sliver's silly abilities. Why don't you go ahead and get us started?
My idea for Sliver's ability is that every Sliver loves cute animals, and they all have sweet dogs and cats on their phone's wallpapers.
That's a pretty wholesome and adorable ability. I'm going to try to match you with regard to that. All Slivers have tails. That way they can wag them when you ask them who's a good boy, who's a good Sliver. Is there anything that you want to talk about Pauper related at all? This is an opportunity for you to just speak your mind if there's anything that's important to you that you would like to discuss.
I don't think so. I don't really thought about that opportunity, and Ban Forest.
What is the deal with your name? I'm curious now. What is that? What is a proboszcz?
Proboszcz, that prefix pro, it's obvious. That was we were creating our MTGO accounts with my friend, and he was proboszcz with O, and I was proboszcz with 0 in it, and we want to be so funny, and I think it's cringy, but I left with a nickname like that. I think there is no way to change it, so I will stay with it. But proboszcz means rector.
I totally understand. As I explained in episode 0 to listeners familiar with the podcast's history, Freestyle is an anagram for Lucifer. I made my account at age 17, and I thought that was really edgy and funny that, the devil comes in disguise, so I just found a way to rearrange the letters that it looks like a real word, and I'm sort of stuck with it all these years later. Still have it. What is the Pauper scene like in Poland?
Pauper scene in Poland is very expanded, but mainly focused on standard and modern. We have a couple of great players, and actually 2 members of MPL, Grzegorz Kowalski and Piotr Głogowski, Urlich and Kanister. Maybe you will be more familiar with that nicknames. Pauper, since the unification is rising in popularity, I think, and I'm hoping it will grow very much.
And I think you're actually helping contribute to that growth, because I understand that you write articles.
Yes, I write articles. New site focused on MTG appeared, and on guildmage.pl you can read articles of best Polish players, including Grzegorz Urlich Kowalski and also me, about the Pauper. I think they are truly translatable, and you are all welcome to write them up and check by yourself.
Last week, we had a couple of Italians on the podcast, and they talked about Pauper. Is that something you've ever traveled to? Is that something you'd be interested in checking out? Because it seemed to me in that interview that those were the most prestigious and the most important Pauper tournaments in all of Europe. Does Poland have any large Pauper tournaments? Am I right in thinking Pauper is the most prestigious event in Europe? And if so, is that something you would ever travel to check out?
No, Poland actually don't have any large Pauper events. I think the Pauper scene is focused on small towns and small LGS where maybe 10 or 15 people are playing regularly. And Paupergeddon is actually, as I know, the most popular and prestigious event in Europe. And I wish really I could take a part of it sometime.
I feel the same way. I'm hoping to travel to Paupergeddon next year so that I can see firsthand and have sort of the experience that my previous guests spoke about. You know, I hope you're able to join as well when that happens. It'd be great. It'd be fantastic to have a nice large Italian dinner with you someday and then jam some Pauper at a large event. I want to thank you so much for coming on the Pauper Players podcast this week.
Thank you for inviting me, Frusile. Unfortunately, I don't have any social medias for MTG, but I'm thinking about Twitter or some Facebook page. But I'm not sure yet, so we will see in the future.
Thank you again so much, man, for coming on the Pauper Players podcast. It was a treat, and I enjoyed our conversation. A note to end on this week. Been very fortunate to develop a little bit of a following with the Pauper Players podcast, and some fans have reached out wanting to donate, wanting to support us directly. Gotta say, I would feel much more comfortable if you guys donated instead to the JED Foundation, which targets teens and young adults who are at risk of suicide. I feel that any dollar spent here would be better spent there. I feel that would be a much better use of any and all funds that would be directed at this podcast. So please do consider instead donating to the JED Foundation. You'll find a link in our description this week. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Pauper Players podcast. It was a pleasure having you. It was a pleasure having my guest. And I look forward to speaking to you all next week. Until then.